Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I do apologize, my camera is not turning on, but I hope everyone can hear me. Caroline, Aidan, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, all good.
Great. Yes, I do apologize. It's technical issues a little bit, but thank you so much. It is my great pleasure to introduce today in this session the two speakers that we have. Carolyn Westbrook, who is a test development researcher for productive skills, writing and speaking with the Assessment Research Group at the British Council. Her main responsibilities are the ongoing validation of the ACTIS test, as well as revising and developing the productive skills tasks. She's a senior fellow of the Higher Education Authority, and before joining the British Council was an associate professor in EFL. She has over 25 years experience teaching and testing ESP, EAP, Business English, and General English in multiple countries such as Spain, Austria, Germany, and the UK. And her main interests are in teaching and testing ESP, EAP, and she has also been involved in several projects developing assessment literacy for teachers. Other speaker, Aidan Holland, is a senior teacher, professional development at the British Council in Madrid. He has been working in English language teaching since 2004. He lived in Taiwan, Italy, and the UK before moving to Spain in 2009, and since then has held a range of different roles at the British Council. He is currently the lead for secondary courses in Spain and is part of the National Continuous Professional Development Team. He has a wealth of experience preparing students for the Cambridge exams and is particularly interested in looking into ways teachers can engage students in class and make them aware of their progress. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to give the floor to our speaker.
Thanks, Rados.
Thanks, Rados.
I'll share my screen and then over to you, Aidan.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. So thank you for that introduction. I'm going to be, just so we frame the presentation a little bit, I'm going to do the first part, which is going to give a bit of a background to the project that we've been working on, and then I'll hand over to Caroline to who'll detail some of the specific results from one of the working groups that we've had set up over the last 6 months. So a bit of the background to the project is I work within the British Council Teaching Centre Network, which has teaching centres in around 50 countries around the world. In these teaching centres, they teach extracurricular English classes to students, usually in extensive courses and also in summer periods in intensive courses. But it's very much supplementary to the main school education systems that the students are in. In early 2014, the British Council moved towards developing its own in-house products for primary and secondary courses, and then into 2016, the secondary courses were rolled out in many countries around the world. This project is mainly focused on the development of a system of formative assessment in the secondary courses. So I'm going to detail a little bit more the structure of those of the materials that we develop for those learners. Secondary Plus is the British Council in-house teaching centre tool for secondary learners, and is now being used in all of the regions where we operate, in all of the centres for the majority of courses. It's a complete product which spans A1 to C1 levels of the CEFR. Each level consists of a set of 10 magazines or units, and they all are based around a topic and lead up to a project. So the teachers are operating within a framework of a methodology which is focused towards project-based and task-based learning principles. From the outset, it was envisaged that Secondary Plus would be written and delivered within a framework of, as I said, teaching which draws on the principles of task and project-based learning. And it was envisaged that teachers would engage students with the learning process through an assessment for learning cycle. This has been this was fed into the materials from an early stage, but one of the main challenges that we had from moving from course books, which we used in courses initially, to using an in-house system of materials, was that teachers did find it challenging to get students to engage with learning aims, or to get teachers to consistently share learning aims and get students to reflect on learning aims throughout lessons and over courses. And one of the main pieces of feedback that we have from the parents of our students and from our students ourselves is they often can struggle to see a clear sense of progress in courses. And this was the main driver for setting up a series of working groups which have been looking into how we can address this, and how we can give teachers clear and workable and practical tools to be able to engage students in their own learning through an assessment for learning cycle. This has taken 2 phases, which I'll detail now. The first was a stage that we, sorry, Karen, I think can you move back a couple of slides? Thanks. So this went through two phases really. It's a project that I've been involved in for the last, I think, 2.5 years, and we've worked in various groups. Phase 1 worked up to developing a series of My Learning Worksheets, which accompany each of the magazines in Secondary Plus, so that the My Learning Worksheet is tailored to the specific project in one magazine, and it basically details the list of success criteria that students need to achieve and gives them a space to reflect on them, as a kind of sandwich assessment system around the project. This received relatively good feedback, but we're looking to enhance it with the project that we're currently working on with our colleagues in the assessment research group. And this is the main brunt of this session. So it's going to look at how we've been mapping the British Council curriculum frames, the BCCF, back into the magazines, which at the development stage weren't driven by a set of assessment descriptors. And as Karen will detail towards the end of the session, it was recommended that we retrofit the British Council curriculum frames, which are more workable and hopefully better teaching tools to be able to drive a clearer sense of progress. Towards the end of the session, we'll look at future directions in the project. Okay. Here we can see a Secondary Plus magazine. This is quite typical. This is for the 12 to 14 age group. We also have a different set of magazines for the 15 to 17s. Each magazine leads into a project, and the project is clearly scaffolded through a series of steps towards the end of the magazine. As I mentioned, assessment for learning is the approach that we'd like teachers to use to engage students with the purpose of learning in classes, across classes and across courses, so that they develop a clearer sense of progress. We do this through it was envisaged at the beginning to do this through having learning aims in the magazines and reflect sections, as you can see on this slide. So the teacher can use these to explain what the students are going to do. Then at the end of a learning sequence, go back to the learning aims themselves and get students to self or peer reflect, and then allow that to be a springboard into reflection on the learning, as you can see here. So here's some little snippets of what's in the magazine. This hasn't been without its challenges. As I mentioned, the we have an extensive network of teaching centres across the world, and we were moving towards quite a dramatic standardisation over these teaching centres, whereas they all offered similar course purposes, so general English to teenagers in this case, and they were using a range of different materials, and there were lots of different people involved in the local syllabus design. Obviously, the local syllabus design always take into account assessment, but having people in academic positions who had very different understandings of what assessment is in their local courses. So when we moved to secondary plus, there was no explicit guidance on how to implement an assessment for learning approach in secondary plus, and that meant that teachers who often were more familiar with testing techniques rather than assessing techniques, they found it difficult to put into play assessment with the minimal guidance that they were given. This resulted in teachers continuing to produce classroom tests, which were of a questionable quality, promoting variable results in class, and certainly not creating a sense of progress as we'd hoped. This was very much at loggerheads with an assessment for learning approach. With assessment for learning, the teachers who were able to pick it up and use it, the feedback often was that they struggled to engage students with the learning aims themselves. So it was challenging to unpack the learning aims and get students to think about them before they went off and did the tasks. And then the reflection section was even more challenging. Students were reluctant to do something which is quite cognitively challenging, and something that across the board again they weren't often used to doing, either in their main schooling or in their British Council classes. Teachers specifically looking at the area of speaking, Secondary Plus is a course which is very, very much focused on the productive skills. Students receive input in the form of readings and listenings, but it's very much as a springboard into speaking and writing. With speaking here, I've put some of the common issues that teachers raised from various teaching centres. We teach up to 15, 17 students in a group, and teachers found it very challenging to evaluate students all at the same time. When they're focusing on smaller groups of students, they found the students became nervous, didn't say very much. Teachers were often not 100% clear about what they were actually evaluating the students against. And students didn't always speak for any great amount of time in a magazine. So any great amount of time in the various tasks in a magazine. The magazine is set up so that students engage with the topic across 3 or 4 learning sequences up into a magazine, up into the project at the end of the magazine. And the original guidance for teachers was that they should evaluate quite an open skill, speaking. So it was quite hard for them to unpack that, and then even more challenging to engage students with it. So it's very much the interpretation of any one given teacher. The initial stages of the project that we're looking at today, and that we've been working on for the last 2 years or so, it was very challenging to figure out what kind of tools teachers needed. One of the main ones I'll talk about before I talk about this slide was teacher training. Obviously, that's fundamental in being able to empower teachers to implement an assessment for learning approach. The project, however, first had to look at what kind of assessment tools it wanted to give teachers so as to be able to engage students in their learning the assessment for learning cycle. So some of the answers to that were to develop and consolidate self and tools that would allow teachers to do self and peer assessment, and give teachers ideas about how they can use success criteria in the productive skills. And whereas this isn't the focus of this session, also planning an effective approach when they're doing the receptive skills, so strategies. And at the same time, hoping that all of these things on the top would set the foundations within a learning sequence to be able to then springboard into reflection and action point setting at the end of a learning sequence. This was the second iteration, and the one that we currently have rolled out around the network for the My Learning Worksheet. This My Learning Worksheet is taken from a magazine in which the students are asked to create and present a showboard for a science fair. And as you can see at the top of it's 1A4 page, and at the top they've got a series of success criteria divided into writing, speaking, and core skills. At the bottom of the page, they've got an area to decide how well they achieve those success criteria, and the space to indicate how they might move ahead in the future. And then there's a space at the bottom for teacher comment. Here's an example of some typical types of reflections that students make. So quite vague, and as a result, I think they show that it is a complex task to have to reflect on a learning activity. So the clearer that teachers can be about the purposes of a class to students at the beginning, I think we found the better that the quality of the reflections will be at the end, and then creating a greater sense of progress. The second main challenge was the reporting system that we used. It was very traditional in format. So as you can see here, the constructs that teachers are asked to report on are very vague, and they're still technically being asked to report on a graded system, which is similar to any numerical scale, when what we really want them to do is engage students with the purpose of classes, rather than getting them to report on areas on a scale. So that was another challenge. How do we translate the assessment information from the assessment for learning into reports in a better way, so it doesn't have a negative washback effect on the courses? Okay, so I think I'm going to pass over to Carolyn.
Thanks, Aidan. So in this project, there are a couple of working groups. There's a general working group that Aidan is on, as you can see, and then there's a secondary proof of concept working group that comprises the 7 people at the bottom of the screen here. So what we did when we went about trying to find out, really what level the information in the magazine was aimed at, we wanted to map the magazines against the CEFR, and that was using the British Council core curriculum framework, as Aidan mentioned, and also the new companion volume of the CEFR, which was published in 2020, which was actually published after the core curriculum framework had been originally designed. So our objective, as I say, was to define the constructs in the magazines by mapping these CEFR-linked descriptors to the different activities. And the 2 key questions that we were asking ourselves throughout was, what is the construct being taught? So what is the skill or the ability that the teacher is aiming to develop in the students? And what level of proficiency would be adequate to fulfill the task? So as you can see, the mapping exercise had several steps. First of all, 2 researchers from the ARG mapped magazines 1 and 2 to the CEFR and to the CV. And then we came together with a third member of the team, in this case it was Aidan, and we agreed on a consensus version for those magazines 1 and 2. After that, we brought in our 3 research assistants. That was Nosheen, Harps and Natalie, who did a sterling job in the rest of the mapping. So the way that we went about it was we first introduced them to the BCCF database and talked them through the database and how to access the information in it. Then they did a CEFR familiarization exercise, and then we explained to them how we'd mapped magazines 1 and 2. So what were the processes that we went through to get to that point? After that, we sent them away to map magazine 3 individually. And again, we all came back together and agreed on a consensus version. And that gave us an opportunity to clarify any queries or any misunderstandings and to make sure that basically everybody was on the same page. Then the research assistants went away and mapped magazines 4 to 10 individually, but they always swapped their mapping with somebody else or with the other 2 people so that they would agree on a final version. In case there were any discrepancies, they would agree and make sure that everybody was on the same page. After that, we developed a composite version of all the unique descriptors across all of the magazines. So that is to say, the descriptor may appear more than once in a magazine, or it may appear in several magazines, but we wanted to see how many unique descriptors we had. And then we just did the same for the projects as well, so specifically focusing on the projects. So this is an overview of the findings from all the magazines. I don't expect you to be able to read it very clearly unless you've got a very big screen. But what we've got down in the first column, excuse me, is the BCCF or the CEFR CV, so curriculum volume scale. That's down here. This tells us whether it's from the BCCF or from the companion volume, and this column here tells us the different CEFR levels. So you can see here, this is just an excerpt of all the descriptors. We've got levels A 2.2 up here in the sort of lighter yellow, B 1.1, which is our target level, down in the sort of gold color, and then down at the bottom in the sort of pale peachy color, we've got descriptors for level B 1.2. Then we have the different skills. So blue is speaking, green is writing, sort of pinky peach is listening, and peach is reading. So you can see these are the different descriptors that were being pulled out in the course of the magazine mapping. And these are the different magazines where those descriptors appear at least once. Now, as I say, it may be that those descriptors appear several times. So, for example, in magazine 2, you might have the first descriptor say twice, and then you'll have the same descriptor in these later magazines, so that we would hope that we can see some development from where people are perhaps approaching the level of the descriptor in the earlier magazines, meeting it sort of around about the middle and possibly towards the end. And obviously we would be expecting that the really good students would be exceeding the descriptor, especially at the lower levels. And I think what you can see from this here is you can see this diagonal where we see that as we go up through the magazines, we get these higher level descriptors coming in, and fewer of the lower level descriptors. So I think that's been quite a useful result as well. So if we move on to the next slide, this gives us an overview of the findings across all of the magazines. So we had 5 unique descriptors at the A1 level here. We had 9 descriptors from the companion volume at A2. And then at A2.1, we had 11 CEFR descriptors, and at A2.2, we had 20 of the CEFR descriptors. But what you can see here quite clearly is that there are more of the B1 descriptors. These ones are from the companion volume, so we've got 13 in here. And again, we've got at the B1.1 level, we've got the most unique descriptors coming in there. And then we had 16 at the B1.2 and 5 then at the B2. What is also gratifying is that we can see here that we have 7 unique speaking descriptors and 6 unique writing descriptors across the magazines. So that tells us that the magazines are tapping into at least 7 different constructs. But as I say, what we find is that the different constructs will be repeated through the magazines, and hopefully we'll see different or if you like, we see different kinds of descriptors coming in as we go up through the levels. What we can also see is from the CV, we have different levels coming out. So we have, for example, mediating a text descriptors and phonological control at the A2 level. Then we have those same ones coming up at the B1 level, and again at the B2 level, so that the students can really see how they are developing. And when we map those results just onto a graph to give you a better view, we can clearly see that the B1 descriptors, B1.1 descriptors are the most, but we do see that we've got quite a lot of A2.2 descriptors as well. So that might be something to consider when we revise the magazines. In terms of the magazine descriptors from the companion volume, again, you can clearly see that there are most descriptors from the B1 level, as we saw on the previous slides. In terms of the projects, again, this was the results of the mapping for the projects only. And again, we can see that there are most unique CEFR CV descriptors here, and also the most B1.1 descriptors. But what we see here is that the writing descriptors are fewer here than the A2.2. What that means is we're tapping into fewer B1.1 constructs, but again, we will see them turning up across the magazines. So the implications of those findings are that we see good validation evidence that the magazines target the correct level on the whole, with some lower level descriptors that will support the lower level, the weaker students, but also some higher level descriptors so that the higher level students can be pushed and achieve more as well. As I say, there's a range of descriptors both above and below the targeted level, and this gives us confidence that these descriptors can be used to assess progress through the magazines. So just to finish off with the future steps, we're looking as the next step to design a teacher's book with all the descriptors. The teachers will have descriptors for all the tasks so that they can see what the learning outcomes are for every single task, not just for the project. And that will hopefully help them to prepare their teaching as well. We're going to revise the My Learning worksheets. So the students will get a My Learning worksheet with a reduced number of descriptors relating only to the project. And after Christmas, we're going into a small scale pilot followed by a large scale pilot. And the questions that we want to answer as we go into the pilot are, is evidence of the performance and progress observable? How easy is it to elicit that evidence? What evidence can be collected to serve as a bank of exemplars for standardization and training? So we want to see, can we collect evidence of students' projects that we can then use for future training of new teachers coming into the system? And what do teachers need to know, or what training do we need to provide to enable them to collect the evidence? Because as Aidan said, that one of the biggest problems was teachers aren't always aware of what to assess or how to assess. So a longer term aim, if you like, is to develop teachers' assessment literacy in the British Council, to finalise the statement of approach for assessment on which this is all based, and then finally to investigate adaptability of the secondary statement of approach and see if we can adapt it to, for example, the adult learning cycles. So that's everything from us. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please shoot.
Thank you very much, Carolyn and Aidan. I mean, we're about at the time, but I would keep this open a bit more. If anyone, there was a question, however, Jamie answered it in the chat. I don't know if there's anything more that you might say about this. The question was about the BCCF database, if it's publicly available or private. But everyone is encouraged to go in the community discussion space to discuss this a little bit further. And if there are no more questions, it's a fascinating project. And how do you, I'm just gonna ask a very quick question, my question. How do you guys think this will be perceived? I know you've done a little bit of trialing by the teachers. I mean, for us, we know it's extremely helpful for them, but we know teachers are very busy. How do you think this might be seen by teachers in the classroom and the schools?
I mean,
did you want to come up?
Yeah. I mean, generally the reception of the My Learning worksheets in their first iteration was really positive, and teachers finally felt that they were given a clear framework that they could base their teaching off, and then that made reflecting slightly less challenging. So I think the more that we can develop tools such as them to give teachers basic, easily unpackable learning aims, I think that they will be receptive to that. But as we said, and feedback that we received from ELAG was that really teacher training needs to be extensive, continuous, and varied. So given through courses, inset, and teacher-led initiatives as well, to be able to give teachers the support that they need to be able to use them properly.
Thank you for that. There's a quite quick question that just came in the chat from Ricky Jeffrey. Does this broad data set come from many different national contexts?
The data set?
So if you're referring to the mapping of the CEFR against the magazines, if that's how we've understood you, the mapping comes from the magazines which are used in all the teaching centres around the world, I believe, right, Aidan?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but we're not looking at nationalities at this. This is just the, if you like, the desk research for the mapping, which is based on the magazines. In terms of the teaching, when we pilot it, then we will be looking at different national contexts, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers and to you watching, and I encourage you to complete a short survey, which you can find on the right-hand side of your screen, just under the chat, and you're welcome to join the discussion. Thank you, and we'll be seeing you at other talks at New Directions. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Radost. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Radost. Bye.